Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate Rural Talk Radio, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the station. Folks, I'm always excited when I do my show, and today is no exception. I have with me today Samuel Ashworth, who is author and writer of the incredible, fantastic book, The Death and Life of August Sweeney, a novel. Samuel Ashworth is a professor of creative writing at George Washington University and a former columnist at The Rumpus. He has done fiction and nonfiction articles in many magazines. He is a native New Yorker, a two-time ghostwriter. This is his first novel, and I must say, in my own opinion, how fortunate are the students that get to have you, Samuel Ashworth, as a professor. So I want to welcome you to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Samuel Ashworth.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, you are welcome. My pleasure. When I have to tell you, Sam, when I received the press release of your book, I was so excited. This is up my alley. I liked food shows. I love blood and guts. I've always been a little macabre. I never did see an autopsy. I always wanted to, but I did get to see some operations. Mm-hmm. And I always liked, blood and guts. And I just thank you for writing this book. How did you come up with this amazing story?
So it kind of came all at once. It started with a question, and a question that sort of fell out of my mouth. It was about 10, 12 years ago. I was bartending in Boston, and I was sitting at a sister bar with a colleague, and she started telling me about this book called Stiff by Mary Roach, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, an incredible book. I'd never heard of it. And as she started talking, I heard myself say, well, what if you could tell a person's life story through the dissection of their body? This just kind of came out of my mouth. And then I stared off into the middle distance for a few minutes, kind of like she was like waving her hand in front of my face, because in that moment, I realized I'd said something that I had never heard of anyone doing before, and suddenly I realized I was also the one to do it. And in that moment, the whole book sort of came together. Not the particulars, not the characters or the plot, but the why. The idea that you could learn to see the life left in the body after the person inside has left the building. And that was the guiding light for the whole project. So I started writing it. I went down to visit a gross anatomy lab that a friend was in because she was doing her first year medical school. And I got very hungry in that lab. I'm walking around. There's 40 cadavers. And gross anatomy is the first class that you do in medical school, right? It's how you learn what the body is, how it works. And you walk into the room, and there's 40 bodies in various states of dissection. And my reaction, I'd never really seen a dead body before. And so I didn't know how I was going to handle it. And it turned out that I got really hungry. Really, really hungry, like the kind of hunger that won't let you go. And it turns out, and I've done some interviews with doctors and medical schools since then, and it turns out this is a very common reaction. And once I knew that, then I knew exactly who the body on the table had to be. It had to be a cook's. Because whatever this relationship between food and death between meat and the human body was enough to sustain a book like this. And so that's where it began.
Well, I couldn't put the book down. I was fascinated, and I loved how you went from the main characters, August, Sweeney, and the medical examiner, Dr. Maya, pronounced name Zhu.
Zhu.
Zhu. It was just, to me, it was so intense. There's a lot of research you did. How long did it take you to research for this book? Because you did some intense research. Wow, 5 years.
It on and off. I didn't go into this planning to devote myself to research, but I've always sort of approached writing the way that an actor approaches roles. I've always been jealous of actors, only in that they get to go and do things like learn fencing in like an 8-week intensive and they get an Olympian to teach them, right? Or they could, trick horseback riding or piano, or Daniel Day-Lewis learned to sew an entire couture gown for his wife for Phantom Thread. That kind of immersion I've always envied, and I thought was a great approach for fiction too. I have a very stable marriage. I have a lovely home life. I have a great relationship with my parents, and which is all to say I am a very boring person emotionally. I do not have a fascinating or compelling inner life or history of trauma. And that's not to say that you need those things to create great and intimate trauma, but for me, I like writing about work. I'm interested in the jobs that people do, especially the jobs that most of us, or at least me, can't really imagine ever becoming routine. And for this book, I had to do actually way more research than I ever thought possible. And it's a miracle that it happened at all. I had always worked in restaurants. I knew I was going to have to learn how to do two things. I was going to have to learn how to be a medical student, and I was going to have to learn how to be a cook, a professional cook. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't going to have to be a med student. I was going to have to be a full-blown doctor, and I wasn't going to be a cook. I was going to be a globally famous celebrity chef. Now, I'm obviously neither of those things in my real life, but I have to, play one in the book. So I got very lucky in 2017, which is really when this book got started. I'd had the idea years before and tabled it. Sort of two things happened. First, I realized that making a medical student wasn't going to work. She wouldn't have the knowledge that I needed her to have. She is a savant for bodies. She's laceratingly intelligent, and her job is to read the body the way you and I read a text. And the basic plot of the book, to clarify things, is that one night on the line, to no one's surprise, August Sweeney, who is a very famous chef who fell into disgrace, dies in full view of everybody. And it falls to this doctor, Maya Zhu, to perform his autopsy. What she doesn't know is that August specifically required that she be the one to do it. She doesn't know who he is, and she doesn't know why. So the book unites 50 years of August's life with one day in hers. And I think that's why you had that reaction of not really being able to stop reading it, because it's constantly pinballing back and forth between their lives.
Yes.
So once I knew that she had to be a doctor, I had to go learn how to actually do that. And I got very, very lucky, because in the summer of 2017, a friend of mine was doing his residency in pathology at a hospital in Pittsburgh. And pathologists have to do autopsies in order to get certified. They're the people who perform autopsies typically. And he happened to be working for the only doctor in America just about who would have let a grad student and journalist into his lab. So I went to Pittsburgh, and I spent 2 weeks assisting with autopsies. Whatever came in, that's what we had to work with. And the main rule was I couldn't touch sharp objects, which was really for my benefit. That same summer, I also went to be a prep cook in a Michelin-starred kitchen. And when I say prep cook, emphasis is on the prep. There wasn't a lot of cook. That meant learning how to stand there for 3 hours and pluck cilantro leaves from their stems, or clean hundreds of squid, or fillet and debone fish, and really learn the physicality of working in a professional kitchen. Because I'd always worked in restaurants, but always in the front of house. So those two things together really alchemized into the story that this book tells. But I couldn't have done it otherwise.
I'll tell you, Sam, I have come to such a appreciation since doing my podcast of, picking up a book of what that writer did to write that book, the research. And your book, the research that you've done just, shines through. It is so intense. I said, wow, this is your first, I'm thinking to myself as I'm reading this is your first novel? This is amazing. Just so detailed. Like, I felt that I was in the kitchen with August. I felt that I was there when he's cleaning up guts from animals, and I thought that I was in the lab with Maya, the pathologist. I said medical examiner before, pathologist, and being there as she is describing his body parts and what the situation is with each part. And it's just so intense, and how, he's just this bigger-than-life character. Can you explain to the audience, in case people don't know, what a Michelin restaurant is?
Sure. The Michelin Guide is the sort of, it's made by the tire company. Michelin Guide, Michelin Tires, they're the same thing. Many decades ago, I don't exactly know when it got started, probably around the 20s or 30s in France, the Michelin Tire Company started putting out a book for drivers in which they highlighted local restaurants along roads, because people were starting to drive. The road trip was a new concept. So by highlighting these restaurants, it kind of gave people a new map of eating around France, which meant in turn that they would drive more, which meant in turn that they would use Michelin tires. And they set up a star system. I don't know when the star system came into play, but it's out of 3 stars. 1 star is something that a lot of chefs will work their entire lives to get. 1 star means that it is a genuinely exceptional restaurant. 2 stars is great, and these are very, very, very precise and stingy ratings, and they send inspectors all over the place. The inspectors are always anonymous. They're on the road most of every year. 3 stars designates a restaurant that is, in their words, worth a special trip. Like, you get in your car with your Michelin tires and you drive to that 3-star restaurant 5 hours away. There are only a handful of these scattered around the world, and there's now a designation that Michelin does called a bib gourmand, which is for a less expensive restaurant that's still extremely high quality. So people spend their whole lives in fine dining chasing Michelin stars. They only came to America about 20 years ago. They only deigned to enter the American market somewhere around 2000, 2003. So that's how the Michelin system works. But they also, and this is important, they also protect what they believe fine dining to be. There are certain things that you must do in order to achieve these stars. One of these is in a 2-star restaurant, the diner should never refill his or her own water glass. God forbid, right? The service has to be so attentive that if that water glass dips a little bit, the server will do it. So it's very fastidious, it's very controlling, and it's exceptionally influential even now.
Oh, well, thank you for explaining. I was wondering if it had a Michelin, if it had to do with the tire company. So thank you for
it absolutely does.
Explaining that. When I was reading your book, it threw me back to when I was growing up, and I'm aging myself here, when I used to watch Julia Child and the Galloping Gourmet, Graham Kerr, and I really would enjoy watching that. And then I used to watch, I think the show was Top Chef.
Yep.
I enjoy watching that show. And people don't realize it unless you worked in the industry. I never worked in a restaurant except McDonald's for 2 weeks, but I did take commercial foods in high school. And it's a tough job. I mean, it is just tough. You have to do all that, prepping and all the things that go on behind the kitchen for your food to come out. It's just really a very high-pressure job. I think it takes a certain type of personality to thrive in that high-pressure environment.
It absolutely does, and I needed to create someone who would in August. And what's important to know about August is that he's an immense man. He's like 6'9", 400 pounds. He creates his own gravity and brings people into his orbit, and that's part of his appeal. He's the best time you've ever had. But what you say is fascinating. You mentioned Julia Child and Top Chef. And Julia Child is actually in the book, as are a lot of major figures from the culinary world, because I wanted this book to be set in our world, in my world, right? Mario Batali is in there. Emerald, Anthony Bourdain, they sort of glance off. Yeah, Padma Lakshmi from Top Chef is actually a key character at one point. And I don't know that if you know this, but Tom Colicchio read the book early on. I didn't know him. I knew someone who knew him, and I never really expected to get anywhere with this, but he read it and he loved it. And he wound up doing the launch event with me when it came out. And I met the man that night, and I was very nervous because I've been watching Top Chef pretty religiously for 20 years. I love that show. And he was a dream, but I was very nervous about him reading it because the book is about his world. August doesn't just become a great chef, he becomes a celebrity chef. He is part of the beginning of the Food Network, and he just grows. And so what I really liked was that at the bookstore event we did together, he said that August Sweeney was the first thing he'd ever read or seen about the restaurant industry that didn't make him cringe once.
Wow.
It's that accurate. I needed it to be accurate. I needed it to be true to life without overly glorifying things. But I also needed it to be as much fun as I could possibly make it.
Yeah. I mean, your book contains so much. I don't want to give book away because I want people to read it, but August Sweeney, in more ways than one, is bigger than life. He's just, and people are drawn to him. And I love the stories of him, from New York, and all the different characters that he comes across, and with the mob, and just, meeting so many different types of people. And he's drawn to the one coworker, which the name just went right out of my head, and he kind of took him under his wing.
Yeah, Hal.
Hal, that's it. Yeah.
Hal, and I named him Hal because August has always been Falstaff. right? The great drunken gourmet character from Shakespeare, who's also he's the most engaging villain there is, and he's like the father figure to Prince Hal, who will be King of England, and then Hal eventually betrays him. So I needed a Hal. I'm not giving too much away, but Hal's a very important character to August. But these are two people who don't let others into their lives much, and that's part of what the arc of the book is about.
It is such a good book. I have to tell you something funny, Sam.
Yes.
My husband Matt was very old-fashioned, chauvinistic, I guess you could say, and he told our son Josh, cooking is women's work. That's what he told Josh. And I said, no, it's not, because some of your best chefs are men. It's always been a male-dominated field. The women are just now getting into it because it's very demanding, long hours, being on your feet. And so I said that is that's not true. So
well, it's interesting you mentioned that, actually. It's because it's not just the long hours, right? It's not just the physicality of the work. It's because of the attitude that you're describing there. And this is something I had to really reckon with in the book, and this is something that I'm proud of in the book, that America only got interested in actual cooking about 25 years ago. Prior to that, there were fancy restaurants here and there, and they were almost always French, and you'd go there for the special occasions. But this was not a gastronomic culture. This was not a cuisine-oriented country. And then people like, Julia Child does her best, but that's still home cooking fundamentally. Mm-hmm. Restaurants really become this extraordinary thing in America starting around 2000. And there were great chefs before that here, but really it takes off in the last 25 years. But with that comes a lot of those chefs back in the day are French trained. So they're trained in this brigade system, this absolutely patriarchal, chauvinistic, brutal, militaristic way of training chefs. And that it's you either you survive it or you break. Those are the options. And me, when I went into the kitchen, I broke real fast. And that meant that anybody who didn't fit that classical mode of the really intense, often abusive male chef would just get purged out of the system. You would lose any interest in doing it. And that happened to a lot of women. And the women who did come through it had to conform to that standard. If maybe the most famous depiction of this is in Ratatouille, where the woman who is in the kitchen in the Pixar movie Ratatouille, she is knife-wielding, dangerous, brilliant, and talks about how she has to be twice as good as everybody else. And so that mindset was so ubiquitous in cooking. Right? That's how we get people like Gordon Ramsay making multiple television shows about how he can solve people's problems by screaming at them enough. And as I was finishing this book, we started to realize what damage that had done, how stupid an approach that was. And I was finishing this book as the Me Too movement was ripping through the culinary world. I have a friend named Hannah Selinger whose book came out last week called Cellar Rat, which is all about her experience in that world and all of the stuff that got swept under the table. And so as I was writing the book, I knew that whenever it came out, restaurant life was going to look a lot different from whatever it was at the moment I was writing it. And so I had to sort of project out how it would change. And I had to subject August to that change too.
Yes.
And I'm glad it's different.
Yes.
But also, the funny thing you mentioned is, though it's worth saying this, because when I met Tom Colicchio, he told me that he is having a terrible time hiring. He's like, we can't hire people because people go to culinary school. They don't really learn the kitchen life, the restaurant life, which is, even if it's a kinder, gentler atmosphere, no one's screaming at you, it's still physically brutal, right? You don't need to make it worse, but that kind of tenacity and like sheer cussedness, I don't know how else to put it, it's a rare combination in people.
It's rough. And the same thing with medical school. Women, you know, when you go, I mean, it's hard enough, Sam, for, you know, men, because with medical school and the things that you see, you know, you're not supposed to show emotions, supposed to, you know, keep it all in and suck it up. And the same thing, you know, for women. And it is hard in the medical field for women. And, of course, there's a lot more female doctors out there now. But it was very difficult. And actually, you don't see many female pathologists, I think. That's probably not. Or is there women?
Actually, I think that there are a high number of women actually who do. I would say more of the pathologists that I know, and this is anecdotal, were women. I don't know whether how that shakes up. But I agree with you. It is a much harder environment. I guess the difference with medical school is, you know, you'll make money, whereas in the restaurant world, there's no guarantee of it. But Maya is acutely aware throughout the book of her status as a woman, as a Chinese immigrant, which she is. She has the sense that her entry into this world, her admission into this world that she cares so much about, is provisional, that it can be revoked, because that's always how she's been brought up, to think that her status as a woman in medicine, as an immigrant, is revocable. And it takes a lot for her to trust anybody as a result. She's completely self-reliant, like pathologically so. And part of what the book had to do was bring her out of that. That's what August does to her, even though he's dead.
I like how I get to see how she's very much loves to be in control. And when, you know, the students come into her pathology room, she doesn't like that. You get the sense she doesn't like people invading in on her territory. But I have to bring this up, Sam. I love how you brought her father into the story, and that he comes to the hospital. And because she's such a control freak, she's embarrassed. You know, it's like, and who isn't if your parents show up at work, right? But when your father shows up and he may not be all there mentally, then you're embarrassed and you can't control it. And she couldn't control it. I don't want to give that much of a book away, but I really like how you zeroed in on that.
I'm so glad. I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. Well, because the father was an answer to a problem that I had. You have a fundamental problem when you are telling a story that takes place over one day in a contained space. An autopsy lab is a pretty lonely space. It's usually you and a tech, right? It's two people. There's not a lot of opportunity for drama in there. And so when you have a character in a contained space, and if you're trying to keep it comic, which is what I was trying to do, I'm not going to write a book about death and not make it funny. Yeah. You have to keep throwing people at that room. And that's what happens throughout the book. They just keep coming, right? And they keep adding more people there are more people in her lab, more chaos, and that's the thing that she is most afraid of. So her father, it's not really a spoiler, her father shows up fairly early, and she has to deal with him. And he is not the father that she's used to. He's very changed, and she doesn't know what to do about it. So that kind of energy, I think, is vital to making a story like this keep moving, because otherwise you run the risk of just it being an encyclopedia, right? A lecture on this, and I couldn't have that happen. The hardest thing, if anything, was keeping the research out and keeping the story tight.
Yes, and I think she was, if I remember correctly, I think she was surprised that her father knew who August was.
Yes, she is very surprised. She actually at first thinks he's having that he's imagining things because he's had a stroke. And it's only then that everyone starts to realize who they are, because when you're in an autopsy lab, you don't use names, at least when you're in a clinical autopsy. And I think it's important to clarify, because listeners may get a little confused here, because most people do, that there are the autopsies that most people have seen on television are usually forensic autopsies. Those are the ones on CSI or Bones or Law and Order or NCIS or any of the other half dozen shows that have autopsies at their core, and which completely misrepresent them. The clinical autopsy is the kind done in cases of quote-unquote natural death, or the kind done in a hospital setting. And they are something I've come to care a lot about. But with clinical autopsies, you're not trying to figure out, who shot somebody or what toxins were in their system. You're trying to figure out the progression of disease. And so that's how this goes. But when you do that, you don't use the person's name. They get a number, right, for distance, for professional remove. And so at first they have no idea. One person says that he looks familiar, but they can't place him because he hasn't been on TV in quite a long time. So that's where it begins. And it's her father who does, in fact, immediately recognize him, because it turns out they were friends.
Yes, and you have a lot in your book about different relationships that August has with his wife, and was estranged from his daughter, the daughter being upset about him having an autopsy. What I like about your book also, Sam, is that, I think people get a wrong impression about autopsies, but they're so important. It's important. It's important to talk about it, that to find out, why did the person die? What was going on in their system? And August had a whole lot going on in his body, for sure. And the way Maya describes it is just, I want to say exquisite, because I don't know what else to use, but it's just magnificent. The way you word everything is just incredible. I'm thinking, you're a genius to come up with this story. These characters, the way you write it, I have great admiration for your work, for sure. And I would read any book that you write. If you have another book in your future, I would definitely would pick it up and read it, and have you on my show again. Excuse me.
Thank you very much. I want to put "You're a Genius" on the book cover. Can I put that on the cover as a blurb?
And I like your book cover too, of the body and the different numbers it has on there. No, I do. I like it. I always want to see an autopsy, because I do like to see the insides. I've always been a weird kid.
I get it.
I was weird when I was growing up. Fascinated with death and dying, and I think your book brings out questions that people need to ask. It's not wrong. It's not horrible to have an autopsy done if you really want to know what is going on or what went on with your loved one. I was reading your book. I sometimes wish that I did have an autopsy done on my husband. He had died of early onset Alzheimer's. because I would like to have known what his brain actually, looked like. And people might think this is weird, but my son and I, Josh and I, sat in Matt's room after he died. We ate breakfast until they came for his body. I thought about donating Matt to medical science, but I knew he didn't want that, so I didn't want him to haunt me. So I didn't do that.
Well,
excuse me. But I think it's so important, especially in situations like Matt's, like my husband's, to find out. In your book, and I wanted to ask you, do they give the pathology report to the family? Because I know with the medical science, if you donate it, they don't.
That's fascinating. So the answer is, and I'm so glad you brought all of that up. I'm so glad you told me that story, because I do get very evangelical about the importance of the clinical autopsy, because 95% of the time when it comes time to ask that question, nobody is prepared, not just to answer it if you're the family, the bereaved family, but in many cases the doctors are not prepared to discuss it. They don't actually know what they're talking about. They've rarely ever seen one. Most doctors will never see an autopsy. They're increasingly rare. The autopsy rate for natural death in the U.S. is south of 5%. And that becomes a real issue, especially in cases like what you described, dementia. A lot of things get misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's, or there are causes of dementia that are only diagnosable through autopsy, things like Lewy body dementia. These have genetic markers, and so they're exceptionally useful. The problem is autopsies are usually available for free in teaching hospitals, which are like less than, I think, an eighth of like all hospitals nationwide. Beyond that, if you want an autopsy, if you're not in a teaching hospital, they'll tell you can use a private service, and that runs between about $1,000 to $5,000, maybe a little more now.
Wow!
And that's a big expense for people. But if you are in a teaching hospital, like, people don't know how to ask for it. And then when asked, right, it's usually a resident or somebody who will ask, like, would you like an autopsy? And then the immediate reaction in people's head is, well, do you mean you don't know why he died? Do you think something was wrong? Do you suspect something? Because their minds immediately go to CSI, because that's what autopsies are for. And that's not how this works. They're incredibly important medical techniques. They remain the gold standard of diagnosis. And I'll tell you something, which is that in 10% of cases, consistently, autopsies reveal mistakes made that would have led to a different outcome. Right? That means that the person would not have died. Hospitals desperately need this kind of quality control. Death certificates have mistakes in them in the cause of death section at a rate of about 50%, because people don't know how to fill them out. Right? A doctor, like a young doctor, may just write cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest isn't the cause of death. Everyone dies of cardiac arrest in one way or another. The question is, what caused that? And it gives the family a narrative of disease, a narrative of death, and it gives you a foothold. And there are definitely people whom it does make squeamish, and I can understand that. And there are doctors who also say, we have such advanced radiological imaging and diagnostic tools that we don't need autopsies in the same way. But they matter. They can help. And so, I have become intensely evangelical about people making plans. People, not just, and I'm sure on your show you talk about things like advanced directives all the time.
Yes.
But disposal of remains, people talk about disposal of remains all the time, but this one part of it doesn't really enter into it. And it should.
Yes.
That's my pitch.
Yes. You know what, Samuel, I'll tell you, I do. I mean, a lot of my shows are being, proactive, having all your, ducks in a row, advanced directives. POA, financial, medical.
You give your family.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that, because I say that all the time. It's good to hear from someone else. But never did the subject of autopsy come up. You are the first person to mention that, and that is, and I'm so glad that you did, because, the hospital that my husband died at isn't a teaching hospital in my area. But I know that when I had the paperwork to donate Matt to the medical school near me, and it did say that I would not receive the report. And I think, if I was in a teaching hospital and if someone did ask me, maybe I would have done that to make sure that it was 100% diagnosis. And I did make sure that on his death certificate that it was Alzheimer's as the cause.
And
my husband was only 66.
Those anatomical bequests. Oh my God! Yeah. And those anatomical bequests are so valuable. That was where it all began. When I went to that the anatomy lab that I went to, those are all gifts, and they are treated with the utmost reverence in medical schools. Medical students take such protective care of the bodies that they learn from. They'll never forget them. Right, and it's an opportunity for the body to continue to be of service and have value, and that's what I loved about it. Right, the whole premise of the book is the human body has inherent value, and that's true even after the person inside, shuts the lights off.
Yes. Well, do your students read your book?
They better. They better buy a
wonderful.
Copy.
All right, what advice did you give your students? I mean, they must.
Oh.
I can't even imagine how fortunate they are to be having you as a professor. And if they read your book, they'll see how brilliant you are.
What do I tell them? I tell them a lot of stuff. I tell them shame doesn't sell books. What do I tell them? The thing I tell them, and I tell this to anyone who's interested in writing or being an artist, something that takes a long time to cultivate, and there's a lot of failure, and there's a lot of rejection, and there's a lot of difficulty. What I tell people is that patience is a weapon, and I phrase that really precisely, that patience is a weapon, because I know better than anybody that telling an aspiring artist to be patient is usually like telling someone having a panic attack to calm down. It doesn't help, right? How
True.
Can you be patient when you are terribly waiting to become the thing you know you were meant to become? When I say patience is a weapon, what I mean is that it's something that comes with discipline. You learn how to cultivate your own patience, to take your time to get things right, to give people the time that they need to read your work and appreciate it, to edit something until it's actually right, to wait for the right agent or editor or representative to come along, and not just take the first thing that's offered because you feel like you're drowning and you're looking for a floating piece of wood going by. So that's the thing I try to tell people, that you can learn to, when you have to make decisions, and usually we make decisions based on what will get us something faster. And if you can think to yourself, no, patience is a weapon, you can make a better choice. And that's the thing that I wish someone had told me 10, even 15 years ago.
Well, no, thank you. Samuel Ashworth, it was so lovely talking to you. I loved your book. Your book just opens up to have so many different conversations about the world of cooking, fine dining, autopsies, relationships. Just the list just goes on, and I congratulate you for such a wonderful book, The Death and Life of August Sweeney. Where can people purchase the book, Sam?
It's great to request it from your local bookstore or library, but it's available on bookshop.org, on Amazon, and virtually any bookstore will either they're not carrying it already, it's really good to request it, and they'll have it for you in a matter of days.
And do you are you on social media where people can connect with you?
I am. The best ways to reach me are via my website, www.samuelashworth.com. I'm on Instagram at samuel.b.ashworth, and I'm on Blue Sky at Samuel Ash. You look my name up, on Blue Sky, you'll find it. But the best way to get me is definitely through my website.
Well, I want to thank you so much. I didn't even cover everything, but I just enjoyed our conversation. And folks, I'm telling you, I love this book. This book will make you laugh. I think it even made me tear up. It's just a fascinating read. It's a fast read. And it's a very intense book. And you know that a lot of research went into it. So, again, congratulations, and I hope it becomes a bestseller. I could see it becoming a bestseller. I could see it becoming a movie.
Would be beautiful.
Yeah, that is great. So best wishes to you on all your future endeavors. And folks, all the information about Samuel Ashworth will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who's the station manager, writes, and Jeannie produces the show. So thank you, Jeannie. And all of this is possible through Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio Network. And I want to thank Lissa Warren, who sent me the material about Samuel Ashworth. I get a lot of clients from Lissa Warren of Lisa Warren PR. So thank you, Lissa. And I want to thank you, the audience. Please subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It's for free on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, to name a few. Tell your friends about it. And you can follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, W-R-Z-E-L. And if you're looking for a support group, hashtag Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever before. Thank you once again for listening. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.